Eleanor's house was a work of art, not the kind that screams from a canvas, but the kind woven into the very fabric of existence, in the symphony of light pouring through panoramic windows, in the silent gleam of the parquet floor that reflected the high, pale sky, in the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, and the subtle note of wax from the antique dresser. This house was her fortress, her temple, and, as she was beginning to realize at 56, her most masterfully gilded cage. She moved through it with the grace of a conductor leading an invisible orchestra. Here, her hand, with its fine veins showing through alabaster skin, adjusted a heavy drape, and the morning sun laid a perfectly measured rectangle on the Persian carpet. There, she snipped a withered bud from an orchid her husband had given her for their anniversary, a gesture so automatic she could no longer remember what they had been celebrating. Everything in this space was subject to a harmony she had spent decades creating, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. Her husband, Julian Ashford, was a monumental figure, a professor, a luminary, an intellectual whose name was spoken with reverence in academic circles. Eleanor was the nameless sculptor who, day after day, dusted off this monument, polished it to a shine, shooed away the pigeons, and constructed a reverent silence around it. She proofread his articles, finding typos his assistants missed, and organized dinners for important people where her culinary talents became the perfect backdrop for his wit. He was the facade of their family, flawless, impressive. She was the load-bearing structures, hidden deep inside. The phone on the kitchen island vibrated. Her daughter, Clara. "Mom, hi. Listen, can you transfer some money to my card? I'm short on rent for the studio, and I also need to pay for materials for my project." Her daughter's voice, always a little impatient and businesslike, left no room for pleasantries. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. There was a need, and there was a resource to meet it. "Of course, sweetie, how much?" she replied, watching the coffee slowly come to a boil in the pot on the stove. "Well, 70,000 would be good, but 100 would be better, just to have a cushion." 100,000. It sounded like she was asking for the salt. Eleanor couldn't remember when their conversations had stopped, including the words, "How are you? What's new? What are you dreaming of?" She had become a walking ATM with a maternal care function for her daughter. Convenient, reliable, available 24/7. Her love was measured by the speed of her money transfers, and her value by her ability to solve other people's problems. And then there was Leo, her late sister's son, an eternal student, a creative soul searching for himself, whose search required constant financial injections. Eleanor felt a sense of guilt towards him, for her sister's early death, for his aimlessness, for the world not being as kind to him as she wished it were. This guilt had turned into monthly transfers that he took for granted, like a belated compensation for the injustices of fate. In the evening, when Julian returned home, tired and majestic, he handed her a folder of documents. "Eleanor, darling, take a look. This is a grant proposal for our new laboratory. It needs a financial guarantee from a private investor. I thought you could act as one. The amount is substantial, but it's about status, you see? It's my legacy." He spoke of his legacy while looking right through her. She wasn't an ally, not a partner, but an instrument. A reliable, proven, infallible one. Her money, which she had inherited from her industrialist father and grown with her own intuition, had long ceased to be hers. It had become a shared family resource, the oxygen that everyone breathed but her. That evening, alone in the impeccably quiet living room, Eleanor walked over to the enormous Venetian mirror in its gilded frame. From its depths, An elegant, well-groomed woman with tired eyes looked back at her. She saw the architect of this house, the sponsor of her husband's brilliant career, the investor in her daughter's ambitions, the guardian of her nephew. She saw everyone but herself. She was the center of a web woven from golden threads of duty, love, and money. A web that held everyone, nourished everyone, protected everyone. And only now, in the deafening silence of her perfect world, did she feel that this web didn't just hold, it was suffocating her. The family dinner was a ritual, a sacred act that Eleanor had perfected over the years. The starched ivory tablecloth, the finest porcelain, the silver cutlery reflecting the flicker of candles in a heavy candelabra. Everything was flawless, measured, cold. This dinner was supposed to be another act in the play titled The Perfect Ashford Family, but it became the stage where the final set pieces collapsed. The conversation, as usual, orbited around Julian and Clara. His upcoming conference, her new ambitious project, which, of course, required another investment. Eleanor was the moderator of this dialogue, pouring wine, serving dishes, and inserting bridging remarks to keep the conversation from dying out. "So, Mom, what will you do when Dad and I are away?" Clara asked casually, slicing into her duck breast. The question didn't sound like it came from interest, but rather from a polite need to fill a pause. Eleanor froze for a moment. Inside her, beneath the layers of duty and habit, something long forgotten stirred, as fragile as a butterfly's wing. A dream. A small one, almost shamefully simple. "I was thinking," she began quietly, as if afraid to scare off her own courage. "There's a small space for sale near the park. I'd like to, maybe, open a little flower shop. Remember I took that floristry course once?" She looked up, searching for support. But she was met with a wall. A cold, almost disdainful glint appeared in Clara's eyes. "A flower shop? Mom, are you serious?" She let out a short, barking laugh. "At your age, with your resources, you're going to play in the dirt and sell bouquets to pensioners? Don't be ridiculous. Your purpose is to help us create something truly meaningful." Every word was a honed blade. They didn't strike the dream itself. They aimed deeper, at her right to even have that dream, at her right to be more than just the family's resource center. Eleanor looked at her husband. He was silent. He was slowly wiping his lips with a napkin, and in that gesture was a deafening indifference. He didn't just fail to defend her. With his silence, he co-signed their daughter's verdict. And then he delivered the final blow, changing the subject with the masterful ease of a surgeon amputating a useless limb. "Speaking of meaningful," Julian said, pushing his plate aside. "Eleanor, I told you about the grant. Everything's falling into place, but there's a detail. To impress the committee, we need to show serious commitment. I've decided we'll put up a deposit from our personal funds. $5 million. It's a formality, the money will be returned, but it needs to be in the foundation's account by next week. Please prepare the transfer order for the bank." $5 million. He said it as if he were asking her to pass the salt. $5 million for his legacy, right after her tiny dream of a flower shop had been crushed like a dead weed. In that moment, all the sounds in the room vanished for Eleanor. The clinking of glasses, the soft crackle of the candles, even the voices of her family, everything drowned in a deafening inner silence. She looked at her husband, at her daughter, at their beautiful, well-kept, alien faces. And for the first time in 30 years, she saw them clearly, without the filter of love and self-deception. She didn't see a family. She saw consumers. Talented, brilliant, but consumers of her life, her money, her soul. They had built a comfortable world around her in which she was assigned a single role, the silent sponsor of their ambitions. And in this world, there was no room for a woman with a dream of a flower shop. It wasn't an explosion or a storm. It was like ice slowly cracking under immense pressure, soundless but irreversible. Something inside her, the very thing that held the entire structure of her life together, fractured with an icy crunch. She nodded silently, but her eyes were empty. There was no longer any warmth in them, no desire to please. A cold, calm glint of a decision being made was forming within them. The dinner was over. The play had been performed. But tomorrow, a new act would begin, and Eleanor would be writing the script herself. The morning brought no relief, but it did bring a strange, ringing clarity. The air in the bedroom, usually thick and sleepy, felt thin and familiar objects. The velvet ottoman, the silver-framed wedding photo, the watercolor landscape on the wall, looked as if they were covered in a fine layer of frost. It wasn't a freezing of her feelings, but their crystallization. Her past life, with all its hustle and self-sacrifice, had overnight turned into a black and white photograph that she now examined with detached curiosity. Eleanor didn't make coffee in her usual pot. Instead, she silently walked into her study. A small room overlooking the garden, which the family delicately called Mom's Corner, but essentially used as a storage space for old magazines and forgotten gifts. She wiped the dust off the lacquered lid of her laptop. Her fingers, accustomed to soft dough and delicate petals, rested on the cold keyboard. A notification from a messaging app popped up on the screen. Julian. Eleanor, darling, did you send the transfer? I'm waiting for confirmation from the foundation. No good morning, no asking how she was, just a businesslike update, a command to be executed. Her hands didn't tremble. She opened her banking app, the screen filled with numbers, adding up to the astronomical sums of her fortune. She opened her transaction history, a long, endless canvas of her self-sacrifice. Here was a transfer to Clara for a startup that never took off. Here was the payment for another course for Leo, who was finding himself. Here, covering the credit card debt Julian racked up on his business trip to Paris. Dozens, hundreds of lines, each one a small monument to her inability to say no, to her blind faith that love could be measured in the zeros on a check. She looked at this digital chronicle of her life and felt nothing but a cold, heavy emptiness. This wasn't her financial statement. It was the bill for the illusion of a family. She highlighted the line with the foundation's account details that Julian had sent. Her finger hovered over the confirm button. For a moment, her husband's face flashed in her memory, his condescending smile, his certainty of her compliance. Then, her daughter's scornful laugh, crushing her small dream. And she simply closed the laptop. The dry click of the plastic sounded like a gunshot in the quiet study. It was the sound of a closing door, the sound of the first no she had ever uttered in her life. That evening, Julian came home in high spirits. He walked into the living room, expecting to see the table set for dinner, but was met only with impeccable, sterile silence. Eleanor was sitting in an armchair with a book in her hands, though she hadn't turned a single page. "Where's dinner?" he asked, shrugging off his jacket. There was no reproach in his voice, only the bewilderment of a man who discovers the sun has decided to rise in the west. "I didn't cook today," she replied evenly, not looking up from her book. He frowned. "All right. Did you send the money? The foundation already called. They were asking about it." Eleanor slowly closed the book and placed it on the small table. She looked up at him. Her gaze no longer held its usual softness, only a calm, profound weariness. "Julian, there will be no money." He froze. A whole range of emotions flickered across his face. First disbelief, then irritation. "What do you mean, no money? Did you forget? Eleanor, this isn't a joke. This is my reputation." "It's your reputation and your laboratory, but the money is mine." For the first time in 30 years, she had spoken that word, mine. It hung in the room, unfamiliar and heavy. Julian stepped closer, changing tactics. His voice now took on the paternal, condescending tones he used to soothe a capricious child. "Darling, what happened? Were you hurt by what Clara said? Come on. You know she can be harsh, but she doesn't mean it. You can't put my life's work at risk because of a momentary upset. That's just selfish." Gaslighting. She had only recently learned the word, but now she felt its sticky touch firsthand. Her feelings, her pain, her dream had just been dismissed as a momentary upset and selfishness. But this time the poison had no effect. "No," she said. A single word, not a shout, not a tantrum, not an accusation, just a statement of fact, a line drawn in the sand that had instantly turned into a stone wall. Julian looked at her as if he were seeing her for the first time. And perhaps he was. Sitting before him was not his compliant, understanding Eleanor. It was a stranger. And this stranger had just locked the door to his world. News of the rebellion spread instantly. Julian, having been defeated in a personal skirmish, immediately called in the heavy artillery, Clara. For their daughter, the news that the financial stream had dried up was equivalent to an announcement of the apocalypse. Her world, built on maternal grants, expensive materials, and rented studios, began to wobble. Clara didn't find Eleanor at home. She had deliberately gone out to a small, quiet coffee shop downtown. She needed a neutral space, a breath of air outside the golden cage. She sat by the window, watching the hurried passers-by, and for the first time in years, felt not anxiety, but a timid sense of peace. This peace was shattered when the coffee shop door flew open and Clara appeared on the threshold, a hurricane in an expensive cashmere coat. She scanned the room with a predatory gaze, found her mother, and headed for the table, oblivious to everyone around her. "I hope this is some kind of stupid joke," she spat out instead of a greeting, tossing her designer handbag onto the table. The chatter at nearby tables quieted. "Hello, Clara," Eleanor replied calmly, taking a small sip of her cappuccino. Her composure infuriated her daughter even more. "What is this circus you're putting on? Dad is furious. Do you realize you're destroying his reputation, his life's work?" "I supported his life's work for 30 years, Eleanor said quietly but clearly. "Now I want to think about my own." Clara let out a laugh full of venom and disbelief. "Your own life? The flower shop? Mom, wake up. Your life is us. Your status, your position in society. It's all thanks to Dad. You are Professor Ashford's wife, not some violet peddler." Eleanor looked at her daughter, at this beautiful, intelligent, ruthless woman she had raised, and she saw in her nothing but a polished reflection of her father's egocentrism. "And my project," Clara pressed on, getting to the main point. "I have deadlines, I need money, you promised." "I never promised anything, Clara. You just took." Eleanor's voice held no reproach, only a statement of fact that brought an angry flush to her daughter's cheeks. "So you're just going to betray us like this, after everything we've done for you?" Clara's voice trembled with tears, but they were tears of rage, not hurt. Eleanor slowly placed her cup back on the saucer. In the ensuing silence, the clatter of porcelain sounded deafening. "What have you done for me, Clara? Allowed me to love you? Allowed me to provide for you? That's not a favor. That's exploitation." And then came the invisible but devastating slap. Clara leaned across the table, her face contorted with contempt. She lowered her voice to an icy, cutting whisper that was more terrifying than any scream. "You know, Mom, you were never really a mother. You were a function, a convenient app for Dad's career and my bills. And now that the app is broken, it turns out it's just a useless piece of plastic." The words, like shards of glass, pierced her heart. They were worse than any physical blow because they carried the cruelest truth. The truth of who she was in their eyes. Not a beloved woman, not a mother, but a thing. A convenient, expensive thing, but a thing nonetheless. Eleanor didn't reply. She just looked at her daughter, and there was something new in her gaze, something Clara had never seen before. Not pain, not hurt, but a complete, total detachment. It was as if a glass wall had instantly risen between them. Clara, receiving no reaction, abruptly stood up, grabbed her purse, and strode out of the coffee shop, leaving behind scorched earth in her mother's soul and a ringing silence among the stunned patrons. Eleanor sat motionless for a long time. The pain was almost physical, sharp, and piercing. But through that pain, like a seedling breaking through asphalt, another feeling was emerging. Liberation. That bitter, venomous slap hadn't broken her. It had burned the last of her bridges. It had put a final seal on her past life, freeing her from her last illusions and her final hope that things could be fixed. There was no going back now. Only forward. After the scene in the coffee shop, Eleanor didn't go home. The very air in that house now seemed poisoned with lies. She checked into a small, nondescript hotel in the city center. The neutral beige walls, the anonymous furniture, the view of strangers' rooftops. It was all healing. There were no memories here, no ghosts of the past, no mirrors reflecting the woman she no longer was. She spent 2 days in silence, interrupted only by calls from her husband and daughter. She didn't answer. She just looked at the names glowing on the screen as reminders of the life she had decided to leave behind. She needed this time for the pain from Clara's words to subside, to transform from molten lava into the hard, cold granite of resolve. On the 3rd day, a message came from Leo. "Aunt Eleanor, where are you? I urgently need money for a new lens. My old one broke. Please send it like you usually do." Her fingers typed the reply quickly and without hesitation. "Leo, the funding has been cut off. It's time for you to learn to live independently." The response came almost instantly. It wasn't a request, not a plea, but the hiss of a wounded snake. "Oh, is that how it is? Fine. Let's see how you like your new independent life." It was followed by a link to a video uploaded to a cloud storage service. Eleanor clicked the link without any sense of foreboding. She thought it was another foolish prank, an attempt to pressure her. But what she saw on the screen was like a lightning strike on a cloudless day. The camera was a little shaky. It was obviously Leo filming on his phone. It was from her recent birthday party. She recognized her sun-drenched garden, the guests, the laden table. There she was, in a light-colored dress, laughing as she accepted a gift from her husband. Then the camera panned away, toward the gazebo where Julian and Clara had secluded themselves, with glasses of champagne. They didn't see they were being filmed. They were speaking quietly, but the phone's microphone ruthlessly captured every word. "The key is to press her guilt button at the right time," Clara drawled, taking a sip. "It's bottomless. He gave her that stupid brooch and she melted. Now I can safely ask for the new studio." "She was mumbling something about a flower shop today," Julian chuckled. "Can you imagine? Our Mother Superior suddenly decides to play at being a violet seller. I could barely keep from laughing in her face." "Hilarious, isn't it?" Clara chimed in. "As long as her money is working for us, she can dream about whatever she wants. The main thing is that our family investment fund doesn't run dry." They clinked their glasses. Their faces, beautiful and relaxed, glowed in the sun. They were laughing. Laughing at her dreams, at her love, which they so cynically called an investment fund. The phone nearly slipped from her weakened fingers. This wasn't just a slap, not just a betrayal. It was a digital guillotine, severing her past from her present. All these years, she had lived in a masterfully constructed lie, doubting herself, blaming herself for not being sensitive enough, for being selfish. And the truth was this: ugly, simple, and documented. The pain was unbearable, but it was cleansing. It wasn't the pain of a new blow. It was the pain of a surgeon lancing an old, festering abscess. Leo, in his petty, spiteful act of revenge, had done her an invaluable service. He had given her what she had been missing: irrefutable proof. The video wasn't a curse. It was her weapon, her justification, and her final liberation. The poison that was meant to kill her had become the antidote. She saved the file. A cold, steel resolve filled her to the brim. Now she knew what to do, and she would do it without a shred of doubt. The next day, Eleanor returned to her house. But this was not the same woman who had left it a few days ago. The uncertainty was gone. The shadow of guilt had vanished. In their place, her movements and her gaze held the cold, calculated precision of a surgeon before a complex operation. She entered the house not as a mistress returning to her nest, but as a demolition expert who had come to assess the scope of the work. When Julian saw her, he tried to start another round of manipulations mixed with reproaches, but she stopped him with a single gesture. "Sit down, Julian, we need to talk." She placed her phone on the polished table and played the video. For the first few seconds, he watched with bewilderment. Then his face began to change. The relaxed smile was replaced by tension, the tension by pallor, and the pallor by blotches of angry, horrified red. He watched as his own cynicism, captured on video, destroyed his world. When the clip ended, a heavy silence hung in the room. "Where did you get this?" he rasped. The question was meaningless. The important thing wasn't where, but what now. "That doesn't matter," Eleanor replied in an even voice. "The only thing that matters is that it's the truth, and I have no intention of hiding this truth any longer." She didn't scream, didn't accuse. She simply stated the facts. And that was more terrifying than any fight. "I'm filing for divorce, Julian, and for the division of assets, everything, down to the last chair that was bought with my money." The consequences of the video, like ripples in water, spread quickly and mercilessly. Eleanor didn't post it publicly. She was smarter, more surgically precise. She sent it to the chairman of the university's academic council, where Julian worked, with a short note. "For your understanding of the moral character of Professor Ashford, who was applying for a multi-million-dollar grant. The effect was explosive. In the academic world, where reputation is currency, such a scandal was tantamount to professional suicide. The grant was out of the question. Moreover, the professor himself was now under threat of an official investigation. The monumental figure began to crack before the eyes of his entire circle. The consequences caught up with Clara just as painfully. Her expensive art project, which she had been promoting in philanthropic circles, relied not only on her mother's money, but also on her family's impeccable reputation. When the rumors began to spread, quietly at first, then louder, that Professor Ashford was a common freeloader and his daughter a cynical manipulator, the doors that used to open on their own slammed shut in her face. Investors backed out one by one. Her career, built on the illusion of status, was collapsing like a house of cards. But for Eleanor, the main battlefront wasn't against them, but against walls of paper. The very next day, she met with the best divorce lawyer in the city, a tough, smart woman named Rachel, who had seen hundreds of stories like hers. They will try to appeal to your pity. They will accuse you of being materialistic, of destroying the family. They will try to prove that all your money was a joint family budget, Rachel warned, studying the documents. "I'm ready," Eleanor replied firmly. "I was a family for 30 years. Now I want to be myself." The meticulous work began. Bank statements, contracts, and receipts were pulled up. Every dollar invested in her husband's legacy, her daughter's startups, and her nephew's self-discovery was now documented. The paper walls of her prison were becoming the foundation of her fortress. Eleanor was no longer fighting her husband and daughter. She was fighting for herself, for the woman they had tried to erase by turning her into a convenient function. And with every signed document, with every legal consultation, that woman became more real, more powerful. She was learning to speak the language of laws and rights, and she liked this language much more. The legal battle was exhausting but necessary. It was like a complex game of chess, where every move required a cool head and a calculated strategy. But as she dealt with the past, Eleanor realized that it wasn't enough. She needed to build a future, and for that, she lacked the most important thing: the blueprints. She had spent her whole life building for others, and now, standing before the empty plot of her own soul, she felt lost. On Rachel's advice, she found a support group for women going through a divorce after many years of marriage. The first session was torture for her. She walked into a small, cozy room where 7 other women of various ages sat around a circular table, and she felt like an outsider, an imposter. Their faces seemed like mirrors reflecting her own fears, her pain, her shame. She remained silent for most of the meeting, listening to the other stories. The story of Diane, whose husband left her for a younger mistress, saddling her with 2 loans. The story of Brenda, who had endured decades of emotional abuse until she realized she was losing herself. The story of Sharon, whose husband tried to take over her business after their divorce, declaring her incompetent. And in every story, in every broken voice, in every pause filled with pain, Eleanor heard the echo of her own life. She was not alone. Her story, which she had considered a unique, shameful anomaly, turned out to be a standard script. Only the scenery and the names were different. At the second meeting, she spoke. Quietly, haltingly, she told them about the golden cage, the flower shop, the slap from her daughter, and the video that had become her bitter medicine. When she finished, there was silence in the room. Then one of the women, with gray hair and incredibly wise eyes, reached across the table and covered her hand with her own. "Welcome to the Survivors Club, dear. she said with a warm smile. And in that moment, Eleanor felt the icy shell that had encased her heart crack for the first time. Here, she wasn't judged. Here, she was understood. Here, her pain wasn't devalued by being called a momentary upset, but was acknowledged as a battle wound. These meetings became her weekly ritual, her source of strength. She was learning all over again, learning to articulate her feelings instead of burying them under a mask of well-being, learning to accept support and to offer it to others, learning to distinguish love from manipulation and care from control. She eagerly absorbed knowledge. She read books on psychology, watched lectures on personal boundaries, and started working with a therapist. It was a quiet, almost invisible work. There were no loud victories or fanfare. There were small daily steps. She went to the movies alone for the first time in years, and she liked it. She signed up for a pottery class and discovered that her fingers, it turned out, remembered how to create something for herself, not for others. She walked for hours around the city, rediscovering it without worrying about anyone else's moods or plans. She was building her new home, not of brick and mortar, but of self-respect, of small joys, of new habits, of warm conversations with women who understood her without words. Each step was a brick she laid in the foundation of her new identity. An identity that was no longer an appendage to someone, no longer a sponsor, no longer a function. She simply was. And that, as it turned out, was more than enough. Almost a year and a half had passed. The legal battles were over. Eleanor had successfully defended her right to the portion of the fortune that belonged to her by law and by conscience. She sold the huge, cold house, her former gilded cage, and bought a small, bright apartment with windows overlooking an old park. But that wasn't her most important acquisition. One spring morning, she stood before a storefront window on which a name was written in elegant script: The Briar Rose. It was the very space she had once spoken of so timidly at dinner. Now it belonged to her. She didn't hire expensive designers. She did everything herself, with the same meticulous care she had once used to create a perfect home for her family. But now this energy was filled with a completely different meaning. It was the joy of creation, not the burden of service. She painted the walls a warm cream color herself, chose the wooden shelves, and drove to the flower markets early in the morning, inhaling the sharp, damp scent of fresh plants. Her shop was nothing like the soulless floral supermarkets. It was a place with a soul. Along with peonies and roses, she sold artisan ceramic pots she made herself, aromatic sachets with herbs, and handmade candles. And it always smelled of freshly brewed coffee and cinnamon. Eleanor set up a small table in the corner and treated every customer. She had no idea that her small, hard-won dream would be so needed not just by her, but by others as well. People came to her for more than just bouquets. They came for warmth. A young girl choosing flowers for a first date received not only a bouquet from Eleanor, but also a kind, encouraging smile. An elderly man buying carnations for his wife's grave found silent empathy in her face. A tired woman who rushed in after work left with not just a modest bunch of lavender, but with the feeling that she had been seen and understood. The Briar Rose became more than just a business. It became an island of humanity, a small club where people could slow down for a minute, breathe in the scent of flowers, and feel seen. Eleanor, who had spent her life as the invisible conductor of others' success, was now the center of her own small world. She worked a lot, but this exhaustion was sweet. She fell asleep not with anxiety about others' problems, but with a pleasant feeling of satisfaction. She learned to enjoy the simple things. The first bud of a rare tulip variety to open, the grateful smile of a customer, the quiet of the evening in her new apartment where no one demanded anything from her. One day, Clara came into the shop. She stood at the threshold for a long time, hesitant to enter. She looked completely different. Her former arrogant gloss was gone. The expensive clothes remained, but the haughtiness had disappeared. She looked lost and more mature. "It's beautiful in here, Mom," she said quietly, her eyes scanning the shelves of flowers. Eleanor didn't answer right away. She finished arranging the bouquet she was holding, and only then did she raise a calm, clear gaze to her daughter. There was no anger, no resentment in it, only peace. "Thank you," she said simply. It wasn't a period at the end of their relationship, but an ellipsis, the beginning of a new dialogue, one that, if it were possible at all, could only happen on this ground, on Eleanor's territory, built on the ruins of her old life. Several more years passed. Eleanor turned 60, but the number no longer felt like a verdict. She saw it as an honorable award, a figure signifying not a decline, but a ripeness, rich, tart, like late autumn berries. Her life had found a rhythm that she set herself. Her mornings began not with anxious anticipation of others' demands, but with a trip to the flower market, where, like an artist before a palette, she chose the colors for the new day. Her days were spent in her little shop, unhurried, filled with fragrances, quiet conversations, and human warmth. She was no longer Professor Ashford's wife, the invisible pillar of his status. After the scandal, Julian had lost not only the grant, but also the respect of his colleagues. His monument had cracked, and through the fissure, an ordinary, aging, and not very happy man was visible. He had tried to get in touch several times, writing her letters full of belated remorse and nostalgia for their shared past. Eleanor read them without malice, but also without sympathy. She looked at the words as if they were letters from a stranger, talking about a woman she had once known but had long since said goodbye to. There was no point in replying. Their story was over. The book closed and placed on the farthest shelf. Her relationship with Clara had turned into a fragile, cautious truce. The daughter, deprived of financial support and the armor of status, had been forced to grow up. Her ambitious projects had popped like soap bubbles, and she had to start from scratch, with a junior position at a design firm where her family name meant nothing. She occasionally visited the Briar Rose, bought a small bouquet, and talked to her mother about the weather, new rose varieties, things simple and safe. Both understood that the chasm between them was too deep to be crossed, but they had learned to stand on its different edges and engage in a polite, detached dialogue. It wasn't closeness, but it was better than war. The biggest discovery for Eleanor was that happiness wasn't a grand fireworks display, but a quiet, steady flame. It was in the little things, in the way the morning light filled her small kitchen, in the gratitude on the face of a customer for whom she had made a wedding bouquet, in the evenings spent with a book and a cup of herbal tea, in the laughter of her friends from the support group, with whom she now traveled to small European towns. She wasn't looking for a new love. She had found something more important, love for herself. She no longer tried to buy someone's affection or earn respect. She simply lived, breathed, felt. One evening, as she was closing the shop, she saw her reflection in the dark glass of the window. A woman with a short haircut, streaked with silver, looked back at her. There wasn't a trace of her former anxiety in her eyes, only a calm, wise depth. Behind her, in the dim light, the shelves overflowed with flowers, her small, handmade paradise. She smiled at this reflection. It was the smile of a person who had walked through a storm and reached the shore. Not a deserted island, but a new, unexplored continent called her own life. The horizon was clear, and she knew that the sunrise waiting for her tomorrow would belong only to her.